Dubrow Suspicion Files.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into one of the most enduring and just politically fraught acts of terrorism in aviation history.
It really is.
We're talking about the night of the winter solstice, December 21st, 1988, and the sudden catastrophic destruction of Pan Am Flight 103.
This event, it reshaped security protocols globally. It served as this stark reminder of the reach of state-sponsored terror. At exactly 19.02 and 50 seconds GMT, the Boeing 747, the famous clipper made of the seas, it just disintegrated.
It was cruising high above Scotland, right, at altitude.
Yeah, 31,000 feet. The immediate human cost was, well, it was staggering. 270 fatalities in total.
That's 259 people on the plane.
And 11 innocent residents killed on the ground in Lockerbie, just tragically in their own homes.
For the late 20th century, Lockerbie really became the defining disaster of aviation terrorism. But here's the central conflict of our deep dive, and it's the reason this case is still so alive today. The narrative we have is just. It's deeply split. It's bifurcated into two completely different versions of the truth. On one hand, you have the official legal verdict.
Right. The one that achieved a form of closure, got compensation for the families, and it pointed squarely and, definitively at Libya. It all relied on some very specific forensic evidence.
And then you have the other story, the persistent, darker counter-narrative.
And this alternative theory, it points fingers at really powerful elements. We're talking Iranian vengeance, funded by millions of dollars.
Syrian proxies known for their bomb-making.
And even, these allegations of CIA-protected drug routes running through Frankfurt Airport, it suggests the entire official inquiry was steered away from the true perpetrators to serve a greater geopolitical necessity.
So our mission today is a rigorous synthesis of all of it. We pulled together the technical forensic data, the messy intelligence reports, the legal proceedings.
Including the massive irregularities in that initial conviction. And, of course, the very serious questions that are hanging over the upcoming trial of the alleged bomb maker.
By the end of this deep dive, you should have a complete nuanced understanding of why the truth behind Lockerbie remains so contested, even now, decades later.
Well, it's a classic case, isn't it? It's where political compromise seems to override judicial integrity. We need to go beyond the simple facts and understand why that official explanation failed to satisfy so many people.
We're talking about the original investigators, intelligence analysts.
And critically, the victims' families themselves. It's a study in how power dynamics can really limit the definition of international justice.
Okay, let's start with the flight itself, the anatomy of the disaster, and the devastating physics of the attack.
It's important to remember Pan Am 103 wasn't a simple direct route.
Right. It started in Frankfurt, West Germany. It was a feeder flight 103A on a smaller Boeing 727.
Exactly. That plane carried passengers and their checked baggage to London Heathrow. And that's where everything was transferred to the massive 747 and 739PA for the big transatlantic leg bound for JFK in New York.
So the bomb had to survive that transfer process.
It did. And the forensic timeline established by the UK's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, the AAIB, is just chillingly precise.
How precise are we talking?
The 747 had just received its oceanic clearance. It was only 7 minutes into its open sea route when the explosion happened. The IED, the improvised explosive device, was meticulously placed. It was hidden inside a Toshiba Radio cassette player.
The infamous Toshiba Radio.
The very same. And that was packed into a bronze-colored Samsonite suitcase.
And where exactly was that suitcase? That placement was so critical, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical. It was loaded into a specific aluminum baggage container, which the airline designated AVE 4041. This container was positioned squarely on the left side of the forward cargo hold.
So right underneath the first-class cabin and the crew rest area.
Right below them. And that placement was the key to the sheer scale of the disaster.
Now, what I find astonishing is that the blast was caused by a relatively small charge. We're talking about only 450 grams of Semtex.
It's less than a pound.
Less than a pound of high explosive. So how did such a small amount of material cause the total instantaneous destruction of a jumbo jet?
This is where the science of blast dynamics becomes the real weapon. The catastrophic destruction was a direct result of the bomb's precise positioning. It was intentionally placed about 25 inches from the external fuselage skin.
Okay.
And that proximity triggered a phenomenon known as the Mach stem effect.
That sounds like something out of high-energy physics.
Yeah.
How did that mechanism work? How did it weaponize such a small amount of Semtex?
Well, its physics leveraged perfectly. So when the bomb detonated, the primary shockwave expanded outward. As it hit the inner skin of the aircraft's fuselage, it reflected instantly, traveling back toward the blast origin.
Okay, so you have one wave going out and one bouncing back.
Exactly. And this reflected wave then combined with the primary incident wave, which was still expanding. Where these two high-pressure zones collided, they formed a massive, focused, high-pressure region. That's the Mach stem.
So if the bomb had been placed in the center of the cargo hold, the damage would have been more contained. But because it was right up against the wall,
the force multiplied and became directed. That's a perfect analogy. The key is that force multiplication.
right,
That localized, focused energy exceeded the simple blast force you'd expect from 400 grams of Semtex by a huge margin. It didn't just rattle the structure, it acted like a highly concentrated, directed punch. It instantly sheared a large, star-shaped hole right through the thick, load-bearing fuselage skin.
and it shattered all the internal structural frames around it.
Completely. The subsequent structural failure was just irreversible. It took the aircraft apart in seconds.
Horrifyingly fast.
It was. The AAIB analysis concluded that within just 3 seconds of the detonation, the entire forward fuselage, that's the nose cone, the cockpit, the first-class section, it separated completely from the main body of the aircraft.
3 seconds.
The rest of the plane, the wings, the fuel, it briefly pitched upward before just plunging. The flight crew would not have had time to react, to realize what was happening.
Not even time to send a distress call.
Not a chance. The cockpit voice recorder ended abruptly. Essentially, you hear the sound of the explosion and then just silence.
The scale of the human tragedy, of course, is what defines the event. The manifest included 190 Americans, so many of them returning home for Christmas, which always adds that extra layer of poignancy.
It does.
And then, of course, there's the specific tragedy of the 35 Syracuse University students. They were on their way back from studying abroad in London. That detail, I think more than anything, galvanized the victims' families into this powerful, organized advocacy movement that continues to this day.
Oh, that community grief and advocacy were absolutely essential. But for the investigators, there was another pivotal detail, a detail that immediately suggested this was not just a random act against a civilian airliner.
You're talking about the passenger list.
Yes. The manifest contained at least 2 high-value U.S. intelligence assets, and they were seated right near the forward cargo hold blast site.
Major Charles McKee and Matthew Gannon. Let's just specify who they were and why their presence fuels the deepest suspicions.
Okay, so Major McKee was a highly decorated officer with the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. He was known as a specialist in counterterrorism and special operations, a real heavy hitter.
And Gannon.
Matthew Gannon was the CIA's deputy station chief in Beirut. At that time, that was a hugely critical and dangerous posting, given the constant Western hostage crises in Lebanon.
So he was right in the thick of it.
Absolutely. Gannon was a fluent Arabist, and he was reportedly returning from an extremely sensitive, fast-tracked mission focused on tracking and, potentially recovering those Western hostages.
So the immediate speculation, which has never faded, was that this wasn't just an attack on Pan Am, this was a targeted strike.
A decapitation strike, as it's been called.
Intended specifically to eliminate McKee and Gannon, either to stop their mission or to silence something they had uncovered.
And the fact that the bomb was placed exactly in the forward hold, right beneath where high-value targets were frequently seated, makes that theory very difficult to shake, regardless of the official denials.
And we have to conclude this section with the physical devastation on the ground. The recovery operation, codenamed Operation Sandwood, was immense.
It was led by the Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary, assisted by the FBI, and it became one of the largest crime scenes ever investigated.
Covering over 845 square miles, I understand.
That's incredible. Just unbelievable. The investigators recovered 319 tons of wreckage. It all had to be painstakingly transported and reassembled on this massive wire frame in a former warehouse facility at Longtown.
Which was crucial for mapping the blast trajectory and the disintegration patterns.
Yes. But the worst of the destruction was concentrated in one small residential area.
Sherwood Crescent in Lockerbie.
Yes. The main wing section, still loaded with an estimated 200,000 pounds of jet fuel, fell almost vertically from that altitude, when it impacted the neighborhood at over 500 miles per hour.
I read it registered on the Richter scale.
It did. 1.6 at nearby seismic stations. The impact carved a massive crater, 155 feet long, and it displaced 560 cubic meters of earth. Houses were just instantly vaporized.
11 residents killed in their homes.
And for some families, because of the intense force in the fireball, no identifiable remains could be recovered. It was an absolute horror show on the ground, matching the horror in the air.
So, to understand why the initial investigation landed on one specific perpetrator, only to pivot later, we have to look back just 5 months before Lockerbie, summer of 1988. This event established the most potent motive for revenge.
We're really examining the principle of symmetrical violence here, an eye for an eye. On July 3, 1988, the American guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes, operating in the Persian Gulf, shot down Iran Air Flight 655.
All 290 civilians on board were killed.
Yes. The U.S. characterized it as a tragic mistake, a misidentification. Iran, however, immediately and very publicly characterized it as a state-sponsored massacre.
And the vow of retaliation was immediate and severe.
It certainly was. Iranian leaders vowed that the skies would rain blood in response. Western intelligence immediately anticipated a symmetrical attack targeting an American commercial airliner with a similar number of casualties.
And this wasn't just theoretical, was it? There was intelligence suggesting a bounty.
That's right. Later declassified documents from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, suggested that the Iranian interior minister at the time, a man named Ali Akbar Mohtashemipour, allegedly paid $10 million to terrorist organizations.
Wow.
Providing $1 million of that upfront specifically to execute this revenge attack.
So if Iran paid for the hit, who did they hire to execute it?
The initial prime suspect, the group with the technical capability and the state sponsorship to pull this off, was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, or PFLP-GC.
A Syrian-backed group.
Yes, notoriously effective, led by Ahmed Jibril, and known for their sophisticated bomb-making.
And the evidence connecting them to Pan Am 103 seemed overwhelming, at least early on. Tell us about the German police operation, Operation Autumn Leaves.
This was the crucial intelligence breakthrough that initially focused the world's attention on the PFLP-GC. In October 1988, so just 2 months before Lockerbie, West German police conducted raids against a PFLP-GC cell operating near Frankfurt.
And in those raids,
They arrested the cell's master bomb maker, a man named Marwan Kriset. And critically, they seized several fully constructed, improvised explosive devices.
and the link to Lockerbie was immediate.
Astonishing. These seized bombs were all concealed inside Toshiba Radio cassette players, the exact same method of concealment used on Pan Am 103 just 2 months later.
I mean, that is the definition of a smoking gun. The motive is Iran, the contractors, the PFLP-GC, and the specific delivery mechanism matches the evidence. Yet the PFLP-GC theory was later dismissed. How do you walk away from that kind of physical evidence?
Well, the investigators, they relied on a single, tiny technical detail to dismiss the PFLP-GC, the type of trigger mechanism.
Okay, so what was the problem?
The bombs seized from the PFLP-GC in Frankfurt used barometric pressure triggers.
So devices designed to detonate only when the aircraft reached a specific altitude, usually cruising altitude, right?
Precisely. And that's the problem. A barometric trigger measures air pressure. It's armed at ground level and calibrated to explode when the pressure drops to the level you experience at, say, 31,000 feet.
Perfect for direct flight.
Perfect for a direct, single-leg flight. But Pan Am 103 was a multi-leg flight. Malta to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to London, London to New York.
Ah, I see. So the pressure changes during those initial legs would be chaotic for a trigger like that.
Exactly. If a bomb with a barometric trigger was loaded at Malta, the successive takeoffs, climbs, descents, landings, the changes in internal cabin pressure would likely have either triggered the device prematurely or just messed up the arming sequence entirely. It's far too unreliable for a complex itinerary.
So the Lockerbie bomb needed a timer that could be set for a long, complex delay, independent altitude, an electronic timer.
Yes.
And this technical gap is what made the shift to the MST-13 electronic timer, and thus to the Libyan theory, suddenly so plausible.
That's the critical juncture. If you accept the technical analysis that the PFLP-GC's bombs weren't suitable, you have to look for a different device.
But there's a lot of skepticism there.
Oh, deep skepticism among some analysts. Kriset, the PFLP-GC bomb maker who was arrested, he was a Jordanian intelligence asset, reportedly working with German authorities.
Right.
The fifth device theory suggests that Kriset may have built one final device for the operation, maybe using a timer, and that this device was deliberately not seized in the raid. The technical unsuitability of the barometric triggers, well, it seemed awfully convenient for dismissing the PFLP-GC.
And that question of convenience is just compounded by the fact that there was clear, ignored foreknowledge of the attack. The story of the Helsinki warning is, frankly, infuriating.
It speaks to a profound intelligence failure or, worse, negligence. On December 5, 1988, only 16 days before the bombing, the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki received an anonymous telephone call.
And it was incredibly specific.
Remarkably so. The warning stated that a Pan Am flight from Frankfurt to the United States would be bombed within the next 2 weeks.
So it had the target, Pan Am, the origin, Frankfurt, and the time frame.
Exactly. While the caller did incorrectly suggest a Finnish woman would carry the device, the combination of those key elements was accurate enough to be taken very seriously.
And the U.S. State Department did take it seriously enough for internal circulation. We know internal notices were posted in embassies. Some Moscow embassy staff reportedly changed their travel plans to avoid Pan Am flights.
Yeah, he did.
But the crucial, fateful decision was made not to make that warning public to the thousands of civilian passengers traveling during the busy holiday season.
And that decision caused massive, justifiable resentment among the victims' families. If high-level U.S. diplomatic personnel were warned and acted on that threat, why were the paying civilian customers left completely in the dark?
It suggests a level of foreknowledge that Western governments have never fully accounted for.
It implies that the threat was known, but the decision was made to manage the intelligence quietly, maybe to protect sources or avoid mass panic. And the result was the unnecessary deaths of 259 people.
Okay, so if the Helsinki warning pointed to Frankfurt and the seized bombs pointed to the Syrian-backed PFLP-GC, then it's hard not to look at the timeline and conclude that politics drove the investigation in a completely different direction.
That's where we're headed.
We now move to 1990, and the initial focus on Iran and the PFLP-GC starts to fade dramatically.
The geopolitical context of 1990 is the absolute key to understanding the official verdict. August 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait. The U.S., under President George H.W. Bush, is mobilizing for the Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm.
And to create a vast international coalition against Saddam Hussein, they needed the support, or at least the neutrality, of key Arab nations. Chief among them, Syria.
Syria, led by President Hafez al-Assad, the very same nation that hosted and protected Ahmed Jibril's PFLP-GC.
Exactly. So just imagine the political firestorm. If the U.S. Justice Department had announced in 1991 that the Lockerbie bombing, the greatest single act of terrorism against Americans up to that point, was masterminded by a group based in Damascus.
Their new coalition partner.
It would have made the alliance politically impossible.
It would have. And critics, including veteran CIA officers like Robert Baer, they firmly believed the investigation was politically steered, or you could even argue corrupted, to shift culpability away from Iran and Syria.
So the failure of the barometric trigger theory, based on that one small technical discrepancy, it became the perfect opportunity to pivot.
To pivot to a politically convenient target that would not disrupt the coalition, Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, the MST-13 timer, became the dispositive fact.
The timing of that discovery in the indictment just seems to strongly suggest this maneuver.
The focus shifted entirely to finding a way to tie that specific piece of electronics to a state sponsor that was already an international pariah, one whose targeting wouldn't complicate the impending military action against Iraq. Libya fit that requirement perfectly.
And this political maneuver culminates in the indictment in November 1991 of two Libyan nationals, Abdelbaset al-Megrahi, a senior Libyan intelligence officer,
and Lamin Khalifa Fhimah, the Libyan Arab Airlines station manager at Lucca Airport in Malta.
So the official case alleged that these two men constructed the IED in Malta, placed it in the Samsonite suitcase, and then introduced it into the baggage system at Lucca.
From there, it was just assumed to have been routed as an untagged bag through Frankfurt and then London.
Let's detail the forensic breakthroughs that were presented as the official trilogy of proof. We need to really focus on the technical details here, especially that MST-13 timer.
Okay, so the first and the most critical piece of evidence was the timer fragment, the MST-13 fragment. This was a piece of green circuit board, literally the size of a fingernail, which was allegedly found embedded in a piece of clothing recovered from the debris field.
And an FBI forensic expert, Thomas Thurman, he linked this fragment to a Swiss electronics firm, EMBO.
Yes, Meister A. Bollier. And the founder, Edwin Bollier, confirmed supplying a batch of 20 such MST-13 timers directly to the Libyan military in the mid-1980s.
So that was the direct, hard evidence needed to tie the mechanism to the state sponsor.
That was the linchpin. And here's why the MST-13 was so important. It wasn't a crude trigger. It's a sophisticated, digitally programmed electronic timer.
So how does its engineering prove state involvement beyond the capabilities of a group like the PFLP-GC?
Well, the PFLP-GC was excellent at explosives and concealment, but the MST-13 represented a real leap in complexity. It used dual battery packs for extended life, ensuring reliability over hours, even days. It was digitally set to a precise time delay.
Calculated to allow for all the airport transfers and long-haul cruising.
Exactly. To use this effectively, you need logistical sophistication, technical expertise in setting and calibrating it for a specific flight itinerary, and access to state procurement channels, which is how Libya acquired them directly from Switzerland. This technical detail, the MST-13, became the anchor justifying the shift away from the PFLP-GC's simpler barometric devices.
The second piece of evidence was just confirming the bomb's packaging.
Right. Forensic traces found in that heavily blast-damaged aluminum container, AVE 40441, allowed investigators to confirm the specific components: fragments of the bronze Samsonite suitcase and pieces of the Toshiba RT SF-16 radio cassette player,
which linked the physical debris back to the known device type.
Whoever the contractor was. And finally, the third pillar, establishing the origin, the Malta clothing connection.
A critical piece of the puzzle.
It was. The clothing items found mixed with the blast debris, a gray Slazenger shirt, a baby grow, some trousers. They were all traced by investigators to a small boutique shop called Mary's House in Slima, Malta.
And this allowed the prosecution to establish the necessary route.
Yes. The bomb was allegedly assembled using these clothes as packing material, bought in Malta, and then put onto the feeder system there. The crucial final step was getting the shopkeeper, Tony Gauci, to identify Megrahi as the buyer.
Okay, so while the official case is focused on this Malta origin, the shadow narrative, it focuses intensely on the obvious failure point: security at the highly secured Frankfurt airport.
Right.
The question isn't just who made the bomb, but how it got onto the plane without being detected. This is where the complex, heavily denied counter-theory of the alleged Operation Korea comes in.
This narrative, primarily drawn from intelligence leaks and the Interfor report, which was commissioned by some of the victims' families, alleges that the bombing was inadvertently facilitated by a deeply compromised U.S. intelligence operation.
Run by rogue elements of the CIA or DEA?
Potentially. The rationale was a controlled delivery system, a long-standing counter-narcotics technique. The goal was allegedly to track heroin moving from the Middle East, maybe Lebanon or Syria, into the U.S. via Frankfurt.
And to do that, they had to bypass security.
To keep the handlers and the drugs secure during transit, the operation allegedly involved the use of unscreened, protected suitcases.
So intelligence officers were allegedly facilitating a green lane for known drug traffickers like the Syrian Mansour al-Qassar to move contraband, all in the name of surveillance.
That is the core allegation. The theory posits that certain suitcases containing drugs and facilitated by al-Qassar's network were allowed to bypass standard security screening at Frankfurt. They were essentially flagged as protected diplomatic traffic.
And the crucial element of betrayal is that a PFLP-GC, the actual bombers, learned of this protected route.
So they didn't need to defeat X-ray machines or metal detectors. They just needed to exploit the intelligence bypass.
Exactly. The theory alleges the terrorists substituted one of the drug bags with the bomb suitcase, ensuring the IED would bypass all stringent security at Frankfurt and be loaded directly onto Pan Am 103 for the transatlantic leg.
This theory is powerful because it explains the security failure and it connects the bombing back to Syrian-based operatives, which the official narrative was forced to ignore.
And this brings us back yet again to the passenger list. If this was exploiting an intelligence route, then Major Charles McKee and Matthew Gannon's presence becomes less of a coincidence and much more of a target.
Well, proponents of the targeted strike theory argue that McKee's team had discovered the full extent of the Operation Korea corruption, the drug running, the massive security risk, maybe the unauthorized nature of the operation itself, and they were returning to Washington to expose the whole scheme.
The implication there is truly sinister. The bombing was either allowed to happen or actively facilitated by rogue elements to silence McKee and Gannon.
To protect the illicit drug and intelligence pipeline, the details fueling this suspicion are numerous, even if the U.S. government vehemently denies them. Beyond their sensitive roles, there were claims about potential tampering with evidence. Major McKee's recovered suitcase was allegedly emptied or manipulated before being returned to his family. While the government maintains Operation Korea never existed in this capacity, the convergence of security failures, the targeting of high-level counterterrorism specialists, and the massive geopolitical pivot away from Syria makes this theory a compelling, if very dark, counter-argument.
Let's return to the official track. After years of negotiation and UN sanctions, Megrahi and Fimo were finally surrendered in 1999. The trial was held in that unique, hybrid Scottish court, sitting at Camp Zeist in the Netherlands. 3 judges, no jury.
And the prosecution's entire case rested on those 3 pillars we defined: the MST13 timer, the Malta clause, and the root inference. For years, the conviction was upheld by the existence of those pillars, but post-conviction analysis,
Especially from the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission,
showed just how profoundly flawed they were.
and the entire verdict, the conviction of Megrahi, it hinged on the credibility of one man, the Maltese shopkeeper, Tony 𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒, the only person to identify Megrahi as the buyer.
𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐂𝐓 was the bridge. He connected the bomb to the perpetrator. If 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐂𝐓's memory failed, the Malta route just evaporated, and his testimony was riddled with severe inconsistencies, even before he knew about any financial reward.
His physical description of the buyer changed repeatedly.
Constantly. At various points, the description he gave authorities varied on height, age, and most specifically on whether the man had a mustache or was clean-shaven. He even identified a different man entirely in an early lineup.
That is an immense amount of doubt to hang a conviction on.
Yeah.
And the timeline of the alleged purchase was equally compromised, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Based on his description of the weather.
This is perhaps the most damning detail for the prosecution's timeline. 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐓 initially claimed the purchase happened when he put up his Christmas lights, which would have been early December. He also claimed it was raining heavily that day. Later, when pressed to tie the purchase to Megrahi's specific travel dates, his timeline shifted. But when meteorological records for Sliema, Malta, were examined, they flatly contradicted 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐓's claim.
Show.
On the date the prosecution needed the purchase to have occurred to match Megrahi's presence, the weather records showed it was not raining.
So if the weather records discredit the day of the alleged purchase, then the entire link placing Megrahi at that shop, establishing the Malta route, it collapses.
Precisely. And the judges knew this, but they still found a way to work around 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐓's unreliability. Furthermore, they relied heavily on the testimony of Edwin Bollier, the Mebo founder who supplied the timers.
Right.
The court officially deemed Bollier untruthful and unreliable, noting he often exaggerated and provided claims that could not be substantiated. Yet the judges accepted the single piece of evidence they needed from him. The fact that he sold a batch of MST13 timers to Libya? It's the definition of cherry-picking evidence.
But the most devastating revelation, the one that absolutely shattered public confidence and led to the verdict being called unsafe, came out after the conviction: the rewards for justice scandal.
This fundamentally undermined the entire judicial process. It was revealed that the U.S. Department of Justice paid Tony 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐓 $2 million and his brother Paul 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐓 $1 million under the Federal Rewards for Justice program.
$3 million in total, paid to the central identification witnesses in the case.
A colossal sum. And the defense counsel was never informed of these payments during the trial.
Never.
The non-disclosure was devastating. The defense was denied the opportunity to cross-examine 𝐏𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐓 on whether his identification was influenced by the promise or receipt of a massive financial reward.
So it implies the identification was not based on pure recall, but was instead purchased.
That's the implication. Megrahi was convicted in 2001, but the severity of these irregularities, the rain discrepancy, the inconsistent descriptions, and the hidden financial incentive led the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission to find the verdict unsafe in 2007, granting him referral for a second appeal.
Okay, before we move to the present, let's briefly acknowledge the political aftermath of that initial conviction. In 2003, Libya formally accepted responsibility for the actions of its officials, a crucial semantic difference, and agreed to pay $2.7 billion in compensation.
$10 million per family. That settlement was the price of peace. Once the money was distributed, UN sanctions against Libya were lifted, initiating the short-lived rehabilitation of the Gaddafi regime with the West.
Then in 2009, Megrahi, suffering from terminal prostate cancer, was controversially granted compassionate release.
He returned to Tripoli a hero and died in 2012, still maintaining his innocence. Most people assumed at that point the legal chapter was closed.
But the U.S. Department of Justice kept working. And in December 2020, they unsealed charges against a third Libyan national, Abu Aguila Mohammed Masoud Khair al-Marimi.
Masoud. the alleged bomb maker.
He's alleged to be the missing technical expert, the one connecting the intelligence officers to the MST-13 device.
That's the key role he allegedly fills. The U.S. allegations claim he was specifically summoned to Malta by 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐒𝐓 and FEMA to construct the IED to set the highly sensitive MST-13 timer for that long delay.
And that upon his return to Libya, he was personally thanked by Gaddafi and his intelligence chief.
Yes, Abdullah al-Senussi. This paints him as the vital executor of the state-sponsored plot.
Masood was extradited to the U.S. in December 2022. What is the single most important piece of evidence against him that the prosecution is relying on?
The primary evidence is a detailed confession he allegedly gave to Libyan law enforcement in September 2012.
A confession.
The statement, which purports to be Masood's own account, details his journey to Malta, the construction of the Semtex-filled Toshiba device, and the setting of the MST-13 timer.
And this is where the case becomes incredibly contentious because the defense is immediately moving to suppress that confession. They're claiming it was obtained under duress and torture.
The context of the confession is absolutely critical. It was taken in 2012, after the fall of the Gaddafi regime, when Murd was held in a prison run by revolutionary militias in a state of, well, chaos.
So the defense is arguing the statement was anything but voluntary.
They're citing multiple international reports from the United Nations and others, which detailed widespread systemic torture, abuse, and a complete lack of due process in Libyan prisons during that 2011-2013 post-revolutionary period.
What specifically does Mashid's defense claim happened during that interrogation?
Mashid claims he was repeatedly threatened with violence, subjected to physical abuse, and ultimately forced to memorize and sign a confession that was already pre-written by militia members.
So the defense argument is clear. A statement obtained in that kind of coercive, lawless environment without legal counsel is the very definition of inadmissible evidence under U.S. law.
It is, but the prosecution is countering that. They maintain the statement was given voluntarily and that the details it contains about the type of Semtex, the specific timer, the assembly location lend an inherent credibility.
Details only the true bomb maker would know.
That's their argument. But the outcome of the suppression hearing is paramount. If the U.S. court throws out that 2012 confession on the grounds of torture or duress, the entire case against Masood, whose trial is scheduled for May 2025, it loses its primary anchor. The pursuit of the bomb maker stalls completely.
So we have taken you, the listener, through this dual reality of the Lockerbie bombing. And you're left holding two dramatically different versions of the truth that seem, at first glance, completely irreconcilable.
It's a difficult position.
You have the official narrative, which achieved that legal closure and compensation. It relies heavily on the technical sophistication of the MST-13 timer and the contested Malta route, but it's just severely compromised by paid, unreliable witnesses and undeniable political maneuvering.
And then you have the potent shadow narrative. This offers a strong, clear motive Iran Air 655. A perfectly capable contractor in the PFLPGC, and a reasonable explanation for the security failure, whether it's Operation Korea or the Helsinki warning.
But that theory has always struggled to definitively link the physical evidence, specifically that sophisticated MST-13 timer, to the Iranian or Syrian proxies.
So is there a unified explanation? Many analysts now suggest that the truth had to be a combination of state actors because no single group seemed to possess all the pieces.
A proposed synthesis.
It's the most logical way to explain the forensic and political anomalies. Iran provided the motive and the massive financial impetus. They contracted the PFLPGC, who provided the specialized bomb design, the Toshiba cassette player concealment, which is why German police seized identical devices.
But the PFLPGC's standard triggers, the barometric ones, were inadequate for the multi-leg route Pan Am 103 required.
And this is where Libyan intelligence steps in to fill that technical gap and execute the plan.
I see.
Libya provided the essential state logistics and the technical upgrade. They had access to the sophisticated MST-13 timers, and they had the intelligence officers, 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐒𝐓 and now allegedly Masood, who could introduce the bomb into the airport baggage system and set that complex electronic timing mechanism.
So this synthesis explains the Iranian money, the Toshiba device, and the Libyan timer.
But it was politically inconvenient in 1991 when the U.S. needed Syria as an ally and preferred to focus exclusively on Gaddafi.
Beyond all the political and legal machinations, the human cost remains the core legacy of this tragedy. We have to remember the legacy of the 35 Syracuse University students and how that community responded.
The response was profound. Syracuse University established the Remembrance Scholars Program, which is a beautiful and enduring memorial. 35 students are selected every year, not just to memorialize the victims, but to study their lives and actively commit to community service and global education in their names.
So it ensures that the victims are not just names on a long-ago tragedy report.
They're a living link to the consequences of the bombing and a powerful testament to the community's resilience.
Even with the Mahzoud trial approaching, there are fundamental, key unresolved issues that ensure the families won't get full closure, even if he is convicted.
The doubt persists because of these 5 unaddressed issues. First, the $3 million paid to the 𝐏𝐻𝐃 brothers, which fundamentally contaminates the first verdict. Second, the Helsinki warning, raising huge questions about why crucial foreknowledge was ignored.
Third, the questions around the alleged drug route Operation Korea and whether this was CIA complicity or simply a catastrophic, exploited security failure at Frankfurt.
Fourth, the strength of the Iran payment as the true mastermind and financial motive remains a strong, unpursued alternative. And finally, the ongoing question of torture and the admissibility of Mahzoud's confession, which threatens to undermine the validity of the entire new case.
The Lockerbie bombing remains this profound wound, a scar on international history, where families were forced to fight not just for convictions, but for the full truth, often exposing the uncomfortable compromises made in the name of global politics.
So what does this all mean for you? Lockerbie is a stark reminder of the massive collateral damage caused by state-sponsored terrorism. But it also lifts the veil on the shadowy, unchecked corners of international intelligence.
It shows us exactly where the line between tracking a threat and potentially facilitating corruption can blur.
And the price paid in human lives when political expediency overrides the search for complete justice. It seems likely that the politics of the 1990s ensured that only a partial, curated truth could ever be officially recognized.
Right. So we established that the PFLP-GC's original bombs used barometric triggers, while the final successful device used a sophisticated state-level electronic MST-13 timer.
Yes.
If the initial, highly motivated Iranian PFLP-GC plan involved an altitude trigger that proved unreliable for a multi-leg flight, then you have to consider the implications of that technical shift. What specific circumstances, what specific geopolitical or technical pressures might have caused the technical transition to the MST-13? Does that complex modification, the switch from a basic altitude trigger to a sophisticated, digitally programmed, state-procured electronic timer, does that point directly back to logistical capabilities beyond a standard terror cell?
That is the ultimate question we must all continue to consider as the May 2025 trial unfolds.